what is the best home design for a homestead? Now, I know in the Eurocentric world of the new world, America, a lot of the modern housing in the United States for homesteads is kind of a colonial style home, but it's missing some very important factors. So what I'm going to share with you today is an ideal homestead that is built on what works well traditionally and across many different climates, but provides for you a focused and outcome-oriented approach to establishing your homestead. So I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead, and I'm going to try a little bit of direct-to-camera items. I have some notes here for a particular style of homestead, and if you're not aware, I actually study historical buildings, architecture, and basically homestead design. So early in colonial America, there is the New England salt box. There's the what we would call a tiny house now, kind of the peaked house, that style of house, the log cabin, for example. These are what we have in our mind from the homestead perspective. But what a lot of people forget is that the majority of pioneer housing was some kind of compound. It was the fort. It was the big fence around a property with houses inside, and then a compact township model, kind of a compact model. So really what works well in many different cultures, from the Middle East, from China, from Europe, from Italy, from all over the world, is a compound style home. Now I could do fancy diagrams. I've got a whiteboard over here, but I'm just really getting familiar with the technology and how to best communicate with you and answer your questions. But some folks have been asking from my paid newsletter is what is the ideal style to build a house that's going to deliver to us different aspects. So one of the aspects people are looking for is protection for small livestock. Okay, so you've got rabbits, you've got chickens, you've got goats, and you're worried about coyotes, you're worried about other things, and the cost to build good fencing is very expensive. So I got a quote on fencing for about 15 acres, and they wanted $48,000 to install fencing. Now I hear a lot of you folks say, well, I'll just install fencing, or I'll let the animals out during the day and then I'll put them back into a shelter. And you can do that. If you have a nice shelter, and this is the typical A-frame shelter, you can actually take a pavilion and convert sections of the pavilion into a shelter with a small little, maybe a 12 by 24 holding pen, so that the animals can actually stay there and at night be locked up in the shelter. And sure, that works up close to your house. But again, this is the model of a courtyard or an enclosure. The only difference is that your home and remaining, like a workshop and barn and everything is not all in one place. Now, it was about 1700s, 18th century area where many of the houses, you'd have a main house. And you can think about how the Amish homes are. It's a very simple house, a peaked roof, and they would have additions added over time. But their barns and their main, such as a garage or a workshop, were actually in kind of a horseshoe shape. So they were similar. I don't know how well this shows up on the camera, but this would be the main home. And then you'd have left and right barn. Now, solar orientation is very important with this. You're going to want to face south in the northern hemisphere and face north in the lower hemisphere, because you want to face in the direction the sun will come, so the sun moves across the front of your home. Okay, now you got good solar aspect, and you can gain the heat from the sun to warm your home up. But your paddock areas that we just talked about would come off of maybe an animal barn over here, and your workshop might be over here, but all of the central area is reserved for living space, but it's all surrounded by a large fence. Now, again, in the pioneer times, this would be a fort, and there would be pine logs put in the ground. In China, this would be a shengyan. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it basically means courtyard house. And again, I don't have a picture. I have a little diagram right down here in the corner. Look at that diagram. You'd have a gate where you come into a open area here, and sometimes that would hold livestock. And then you'd have a gate here that goes into the main area, and it was a kind of a quadrilateral home. The home was actually formed in different sections, and I'm starting to realize I'm going to probably need a whiteboard for this or share some PowerPoints or something, because these are really good examples. The key feature of this is that in a stockade-style home, from the context of North America, you could bring in all the animals at night, and you could lock the gates and keep out the predators and keep out the poachers and other things like that. For a courtyard home, such in Beijing, even in the city, they had courtyard homes, which allowed them to have gardens inside the home area so that you could enjoy the beauty of nature. Actually, the Japanese-style courtyard house, there's a beauty aspect and interaction with nature, where the Chinese Beijing home or the Chinese house in the area, and they don't always have to be square, by the way. You could do this round, but the key is that the courtyard had your herbs, it had your soft veg, it had fruit trees, it had access to these things readily available. Now, not only are these houses designed this way for your personal safety, but they're also for the safety of your animals and your food, because it's an enclosure. In modern times today, Africa, various types of European countries, the courtyard is very common. Middle East, you're going to pull your vehicle into the courtyard. Now, the orientation of the courtyard and whether or not the tops of the houses are living spaces is different in the climates. But in the temperate climate where I'm at today, a courtyard house would face south. You'd have a big gate on the south wall, and then the remaining walls would be solid, and then your home would be in the back like this. So your home would be in the back, and then you'd have, you might have a garage and workshop over here. You might have an animal shelter here that opens up on either side. But these walls allow you to close everything down. You're going to gain some shade. If this back wall's thick, you're going to gain some heat mass absorption. So the sun will shine in here on the back wall, warm that wall up during the day. You can have espalier fruits. Think about the English walled gardens. It's really a way to also have an oasis, a getaway. Now, again, in our modern society, we have these suburbs that sprawl all over the place. Houses are pointing in all different directions. We're not benefiting from the solar exposure. And really, it's kind of messed up, because there's this big push for solar panels, but the majority of American homes are not oriented in such a way that solar panels would be, you need extra equipment to tilt the solar panels. I'm seeing myself in the screen over here while I'm working with this, so bear with me, folks. Stay here. I'm going to deliver to you some valuable information that's going to help with your homestead design. It's going to help you create a microclimate that is controlled, that allows you to, again, protect your animals, and allows you to grow small gardens near the home, your zone 1. Instead of your zone 1 being around your house is actually in zone 1 with walls around the zone 1, protecting that space. If you're in an area with lots of wind, you can buffer the wind. Now, again, you don't have to have walls. We're not, in the modern world, it may not be as necessary to have defensible walls around your home, but a lot of times hedges, for example, that'll work as windbreaks, and also some form of barrier that allows you, again, to bring the animals in and protect them. So if you've got free-ranging chickens out on a chicken tractor, at night you lock them up in the chicken tractor. But in the winter, do you leave them out in the middle of a field? No. You bring them into a greenhouse. Now, these buildings don't have to be solid structures. Your home's going to be in the back. The sun is shining into your home. You've got that solar aspect. But this could be a greenhouse, and this other could be a garage or a workshop or animal shelter. Now, what's important about this is once you have this wall around the property, and this wall could be 4 foot tall, or it could be 8 feet tall or 10 feet tall. Your houses could have peaked roofs, or your houses could have flat roofs to allow you to build higher in the house. In the Middle East, a lot of homes are made out of concrete, and they'll actually build one floor at a time to kind of build into the home. The Amish, I mentioned that earlier, they're going to build a small house here, but then they're going to build little sections off of that house to expand it, or a section out the back to expand it. Now, the courtyard fencing, depending on how you believe this economy is going, could be a defensive barrier to protect your valuables, and to protect your animals. And certainly the barrier will keep out raccoons, possums, large dogs, or other things that could be a hazard to your animals. Now, another value of the courtyard home, and I actually did a podcast on this and went into a lot of details, is not only is it proven in many different climates, but it can be very large. So you can have a courtyard fence that is the whole acre. Now, again, I prefer rectangular fences, so the courtyard being rectangular shape with the different walls, and these can be wooden walls, they can be stone walls, they can be concrete precast. It doesn't really matter to me what's appropriate for the materials at your environment. But I prefer square walls because this gives you nooks to do things with and little tiny outdoor living spaces. And I think this is very important to cover. Many homes are designed with indoor spaces. Now, with building material costs going extremely high, I was looking at a house maybe 5 years ago, $75 a square foot to build a house. Now it is $255 a square foot to build a house. Now, it can be more or less in your area. It really depends. And you could believe you're saving money by building it yourself. But actually, if you factor in your cost or your time, if you were being paid minimum wage, for example, you'll find that the home values are about the same no matter who's building them. But what if your living spaces were outside the home? You could have a smaller home and have a much more fuller lifestyle. Now, let me explain what this means. Traditionally, homes are much smaller. Now, I live in a neighborhood built in the 1950s, and these homes are 3,200 square feet, 2,500 square feet. There's even homes in this neighborhood that are 10,000 square feet. That is unusual. The majority of the homes in the 1950s were 1,000 square feet, 900 square feet. And really what's the best square footage for your home is what can you clean in a reasonable amount of time. But what I'm advocating here is the courtyard concept. And it depends on what you're doing. Courtyards actually have thermal value. A more narrow courtyard can funnel the sun in and give you good light, but actually create an updraft to pull heat through the home, actually pulling air through the walls of the home and then up through the courtyard. In ancient Greece, these courtyards actually had big water features so that when it rained, the rain would funnel into a water feature in the middle and it would provide fresh water. It would provide a kind of an estate. But what I'm saying here is that the way the property is designed creates living space beyond the walls of your home, but within the walls of your courtyard. Now, this is very important. It means you can build a smaller home and have more outdoor living, more enjoyment, and have ultimately more outdoor fresh air space. See, when we can live out and around our home, we're more likely to check on the vegetables. We're more likely to care for the animals. We're more likely to maintain the quality and health of the areas that your animals are staying in. And this is extremely important because that outdoor lifestyle has been proven to deliver to you kind of a endorphin and serotonin and just that uplift feeling. So imagine, a lot of folks like to sit out on their front porch. Well, imagine if you could not only sit at your front porch, but you had a garden that you could walk through and you could enjoy, and your children could pick the vegetables and eat them during the day and really get involved in their food. What if when at the end of the day you were able to bring in your animals? Now, a lot of folks in a homestead are going to have smaller animals and they're going to have fewer animals. Now, I know a lot of you saying, well, I don't want to smell the stink of the animals. Well, remember the story of Mary and Joseph finding a cottage and they slept in a stable. Well, that doesn't mean that the stable smelled bad. The stable, properly maintained, should not smell. If your animals have odor or your bedding has odor, then you're not doing something right. In fact, there's a problem. You should not have animals that smell. So we start looking at deep mulching systems. We start looking at how the paddocks are designed for both cleanliness and for everyday management. We also look at this quantity and stocking of animals. So some homesteads and small farms will put animals far out away from the house, and it's kind of a chore to check on them. This model, which is a traditional model, which is a model that's used all across the world, actually brings the animals in at night as part of the family. Now, you're not sleeping with them in the same room, but they're in the courtyard. And your courtyard could be a half-acre courtyard. It could be a smaller courtyard, but you have the appropriate number of animals. You're able to lock them up at night. You're able to feed them, and you're able to bring in enough biomass, enough carbon material to make sure their bedding is clean and smells good. Now, the animals don't stay in there all the time. The animals will come out during the day, and they'll go to a paddock or a pasture. They'll come out during the day, and they'll be in maybe a chicken tractor system, for example. But again, because you're bringing them in every night, you're definitely going to be able to make sure their quality and their care is much better, and that the health of the animals is better. Now, again, I'm showing you a courtyard design that's very simple, okay? But it could be, these houses could be 24 foot by 36 feet long. They could be small houses, 12 feet deep and 24 feet wide. They could be even smaller than that. It doesn't really matter. But if you think you're going to expand the home, you may want to have less permanent fencing. So block fencing, precast fencing, stone fencing. This could be a wall that's only knee high. What's important about this model, and we're going to go into the next part of it, is that it almost forces you to actually get projects done. So if you have within the proximity of your home a small garden that's not got any action going on and is all full of weeds, you're more likely to go out there and do something about it because it's relevant. It has a high level of recency. You're interacting with it periodically, and it becomes more of a casual exposure that allows you to take action immediately. Now, another factor is when you have animals in a property like this, if they smell, of course, you're going to clean their stalls out more often. You'll find this with horse owners. They'll have that little courtyard, and it's not even, sometimes it'll even be the house, and there'll be a little tiny covered walkway over to the horses. It's like almost they're living with the horses, and that's because, again, the emotional connection to the animal and the health and the cleanliness really builds that relationship. And I know that sounds strange to say our relationship with animals, especially livestock that we're going to eat or we're going to take to market. But again, what we're about here at Prosperity Homestead is raising up the forms of capital. And so, for example, the courtyard paddocks may not have all your animals in them, but it may have your breeding pairs. So if you've got goats or you've got a pregnant animal, you would, like a sow that's pregnant, you would bring them into the courtyard at night, bring them into the enclosure where they are better protected from predators. And it's almost saying that, look, we're protecting you and we're caring for you, but because of the proximity, you'll be able to go check on the animal better. You'll be able to better interact and respond to the animal. And this is really a time-saving activity. I think the courtyard model or the compound model has really driven, and I know, folks, it'd be much better with pictures that weren't tiny like this, but I just want to give you a general idea. I want you to think about the Chinese homes, the Japanese homes, the homes that are literally wrapped around a garden and then go a little bit higher in scale. So everything you need is within these walls. Now, it doesn't mean you can't cultivate outside those walls. You may not have a courtyard large enough to pull a tractor into, but you're bringing those things that are important to your life closer to you so that they can be maintained and they can be monitored, they can be cared for, because there's a symbiotic relationship between you and the animals, and you and the crops and the food and the herbs and the flowers. And I think this is why looking at the different cultures, looking at the different applications of a courtyard home or a compound home, about why this is such a tried and true model. In America, I don't know why we sprawl things around. I've seen a lot of properties that I've either done consulting with or otherwise, but they kind of have this house, and instead of building their own private town, they have a house here, and then 125 yards out, there's a barn, and then over the other direction, there's another building, a workshop. And when they they're in the barn working and they forget a tool and they got to go over to the workshop, it's like an extra 20-minute walk. You know, what I'm talking about here is you have a base camp, you have a core living cell, and you have your home, your residence, you have your animals, you have your basic workshops, and then you go out from there. And so you would have next to the courtyard home. So if you have a decent sized courtyard home, you might have outside here maybe another broad acreage garden here. You might have a zone 3 in the back, or even be butted right up to zone 5. Zone 3 through zone 5 are going to be more trees. You can have an orchard outside the wall. You can even go further, and I like the quadrilateral approach where you have everything's built out in quadrants. I like how you can cookie cutter those quadrants out so that you can get greater production with less, just fewer resources. It means on 3 to 5 acres, you can have abundance. You can have a plethora of different kinds of plants and animals, and then you don't have to pay $48,000 for a fence because you fenced in such a smaller area. Now, again, I see this as a rarity, yet on a global scale, you'll see that the country home in England, for example, has the round driveway in the middle and the house is wrapped around. A lot of high schools and public buildings have that horseshoe look. Now, if that horseshoe is pointing in the right direction for the maximum solar aspect, then it's going to be very bright in the courtyard. You're going to be able to grow things in that courtyard. But if you need to get from one end of the building to another, it's less travel. It's less effort on your part. Now, if you're stamping out additional areas and you're expanding that kind of property, you're now moving out towards this abundance that surrounds you, rather than having something on the back 5 acres of the property and something on the other corner of the property. It's just better organized. So when we're doing a design plan, we want to sit down on paper. I'm a big advocate of drawing some pictures. In fact, here's some loft designs. Okay, you can scratch it out on paper and start getting an idea of how you're going to build these homes. And actually, so here are some additional courtyard designs that we're talking about. Now, I have mentioned on forums before, I do have experience on physical security, Tempest and other types of physical security. A courtyard design is a secure structure. If you need to put up cameras, you can see the majority of the outside of the property, and then someone actually comes in the gates, then they're inside the property. Now, if you have a courtyard structure with 8-foot or higher walls, and this is not unusual in a lot of places, you'll find the wealthy will very often build these structures because it gives them, again, personal privacy. Now, somebody who's really wealthy might put a wall like that around a whole 10-acre compound. In most of the cases, I'm talking about maybe an acre at the most for what we do in a typical homestead. But if you've got an 8-foot wall around your property, and even if you got these double doors so you can drive your vehicle into it, law enforcement is not permitted to enter that compound without permission. If someone is breaking into your home and they have entered that compound, it is obvious that they have been breaking and entering. It allows your kids, for example, to bring in their bikes and put them in a little utility shed. Everything is enclosed. Actually, England, a lot of their townhouses have these courtyards off the back, so it doesn't necessarily have to wrap around the whole property. But again, most of the folks on this channel, most of the folks that are with us on the paid newsletter at Prosperity Homestead are functioning some kind of agricultural homestead. Now, the Chinese style courtyard is designed to have multi-generations of family in that home setting. So you don't necessarily have to have just one house in that particular setup. But looking at the questions that I get from Prosperity Homestead, the newsletter, and the membership site, most of you guys are actually going to have a smaller home, maybe a ranch home. But what I'm advocating, instead of putting the fencing in your backyard, offset your home a little bit, back a little bit further, and put your fencing in your front yard, and go as far as to enclosing the space. Now, why is this important on acreage? So let's say you've got a perfectly rectangular 3 to 5 acres, and you position your house on what would be the center line of that land. So if you've got a rectangle, you're going to center your house in the middle of the property. Now, that's not always feasible. It depends on whether the property's got a grade or not. Sometimes you got to put the house really close to the front because of the grade. But again, if you're choosing land and you're able to find land that has a minimal grade and you're able to put your home a little bit behind the center line on the back lot of your home, then you can put a courtyard in the front, and you're going to be able to look outside every day. Every time you leave your home, you're going to pass your garden. You're going to see the chickens. You're going to see the rabbits. You're going to take better care of it. It's going to look nicer. But if you do want to expand, you can now actually put another courtyard behind your home. So if the house is too far forward in the property or too far back in the property, you lose the opportunity of enclosing your house in a manageable space. Now, you don't have to have, again, this doesn't have to be, walls with barbed wire on them and you've imprisoned yourself. It could be what's called a hip wall. It's about 3 to 4 foot high, and it just goes around the space. You see this lot in Scotland, and the hip wall is a differentiation between your inner yard or your courtyard and your outer yard, which could be your broad acre farm. A lot of times these courtyards will have a driving road right outside of the fence area, and on the inside it may have grazing cells for smaller animals such as sheep, goats, for example, goats that need to be milked daily. It just doesn't make a lot of sense when I'm looking at both the historical aspects all the way back to ancient times, and I'm looking at what works well across a number of cultures, a number of geographic types of locations, a number of climates. The courtyard gives you the security to keep your assets together. Now, let's talk a little bit about the 8 forms of capital. Your animals are more than just food. They are a negotiable asset that can be cash flow for your small farm, homestead, or an estate. Your plant starts. They cost you money to buy plant starts, but if you start them from seed, you'll save some money. But can you secure those in a greenhouse or something to get a good growing pace, a good quality of seed to seedling ratio? Are you guys still with me? Do you understand what I'm saying here? I'm saying that the way homes are designed in the majority are not really helping you get the most from the land. Now, don't get me wrong. In Virginia Beach, there's a few neighborhoods that have large rectangular lots, and the homes are slightly offset behind what they would call, if you cut the property in half, kind of a dotted line, there are slight offset there. But unfortunately, they have these huge lawns in the front that has very little value. It is rare to see any house that maybe will have a garden in the front yard, or even an ornamental garden, a prayer garden or a walking garden. And it's just such a shame. But they will enclose their backyards. Unfortunately, it's like a chain link fence. But a good privacy fence enclosing your backyard, again, is going to keep out stray dogs and animals. It's going to keep out any large wildlife that could harm your goats, sheep, rabbits, quail, whatever animals you've got out there, pigeon coop. And another thing too, and I don't want to keep throwing this in here, but we do have a number of people that are rightfully concerned about food security, and sometimes food security, and I've heard a couple times, and sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not, but they say their neighbors or strangers steal their vegetables. Now, when I was growing up, our neighbor, we had vegetables in the front yard, out the side of the house, mostly cherry tomatoes, and our neighbor would come over, and we'd come out of the house in the morning, and the neighbor's like this. He's eating cherry tomatoes. Now, we planted extra cherry tomatoes, and we love this neighbor, really good neighbor. We don't mind sharing with the neighbor, but they weren't growing a garden, and we were growing a huge garden. And sometimes they reach over the fence and take grapes, and sometimes they take, just the mentality of some people is that what they can see is what they can have. Maybe they're foraging. I don't know. But again, the Courtyard House secures your front lot. It allows you to bring your vehicle into your property. And the way most laws work is if somebody has to scale a fence in order to get into your property, the punishment is much higher than if they can just walk up onto your property. The fence allows you a barrier to protect your food and animals from the outside. It also is an investment in your, not only the animal's protection, but the animal's health. Because if the animals are in close proximity to your home, because you've got a courtyard or a horseshoe shape where you're bringing these things close together, then you're more likely to care for them and you'll have better quality animals. Now, today, a feeder pig is $50 or so. Some places it's $100. And let's say you got 5 to 10 feeder pigs and you're going to have them close to your home. A lot of people would say, what about the noise? Well, first off, I'd rather hear the pigs than not hear the pigs if they're out there. What about the smell? Well, you can have deep bedding, and if you can smell the animals, they're not clean. They're in the filth. They're at risk of disease. So why would you have smelly animals and have them away from your home where you can't properly monitor them? And think about this too. A lot of you folks have urban homesteads where you've got neighbors, and no matter where your animals are on your property, you don't want them to smell for any reason. It's just not, the smell from rabbits, for example, is ammonia. It's bad for their respiratory system, and it can be resolved by basically layering in carbonous materials on their manures. So you can still do deep bedding and not have to dig it out every day or not have to do a lot of cleaning. But again, you've got to go in there and lay straw on it. You've got to go in there and lay wood chips in there or sawdust, something that's absorbent to absorb the urine, which will evaporate in an ammonia, which is not good for you either. And so you're now trapping that urine in the carbonous material, which could be grass clippings. It could be a worm bin underneath the rabbits. But again, if you can smell it, it's not being done right. Okay? That's just, I don't know how to convey that. If you can smell it, it's not being done right. So again, I'm going to summarize here. We've got a courtyard home. The courtyard is wrapping around those things of value and making them closer proximity so that you could more easily care for them. It is a design that's both has historical context, such as the frontier times in the United States when they would build a wooden fence around the village or around the settlement, and then all the animals would come in at night and have areas where they would live at night, and it's in this protected area, and that they would have gardens inside the enclosure to protect it from predation and outside threats. It's a model that's very common today in Africa, in the Middle East, and all across Europe in various forms. What's interesting, in Spain and in Mexico, there's a form of courtyard house that actually helps heat and cool the home. I didn't have time to cover that today, but it's something, if you're interested, we can talk about in the next next talk like this. A courtyard home is going to first, and just let me wrap this up with, first it's going to be some kind of enclosure. So everything is maintained in and around your home. It's going to have some kind of utility buildings, and utility as in value. So you may have a livestock shed, you may have a workshop, you may have a chicken coop. Now, I like multifunctioning buildings, so you would have maybe a mobile chicken tractor that gets pulled into a building at night. You have a pavilion with an outdoor kitchen in it. These outdoor living spaces that we talked about. Next, you're going to have your main house. and your main house is going to be smaller because, again, you've surrounded your home with outdoor living spaces. The water feature in the middle of the courtyard, the different areas with vegetable gardens, the little sitting area or nook in the corner. You may have a secret garden for the kids over in a different corner where they go. You may have fruit trees that are espalion on the walls. You may have different things in that space. And then finally, outside of your courtyard is your broad acreage. You still might have fencing. You might have wire fencing instead of a brick fence, but it's sectioning off of your property so that you can. I like the grid design, but you can use a more natural design. You can use a circular design. The key is that everything is close proximity to your home and your living space, so that you're not spending a lot of travel time between items. And so, for example, when you remove the manure or you're cleaning out a stall, for example, you're not having to take that manure all the way across the property. You're not having to ship it anywhere. You can simply remove it, throw it in the garden, throw it in compost piles, and then the compost goes into the garden. It's just, we're thinking about space in the design. So when I work on a design plan with a client and we look at these things, a lot of times people will say, well, that's just, everything's too close. It seems crowded. But again, Homestead is an active interaction. Your lifestyle becomes more active, more outdoors, more working with the land, more working with the animals. Why not make that closer proximity so you're not spending all your time walking your property? And when you do have this kind of thing, it makes it shorter runs for the water, shorter runs for power and different kinds of resources you might need, and even dual and multi-functioning buildings. So we were looking at designing an outdoor kitchen with a hoist so that we could also use it for processing animals outside. Now there's different specifications here, but I want you to think modular. I want you to think an enclosure to keep out what's bad and to keep in what's good, and the reinvestment of resources. So how does waste move through this property so that you can reinvest it, but also have the shortest food mile as possible? I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. If you have specific questions and you'd like me to do more of these presentations, visit me at www.prosperityhomestead.org. Go to the contact page and ask your questions. If this is on YouTube or one of those other channels, you can ask your comments, make your comments below and ask your questions as well. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this program, and I'm here to help you develop your land. You own a piece of land, you have a small farm, a homestead, or an estate. How do you get more projects done? How do you develop the land for maximum value? And how do you turn that land into just a prosperous, sustainable, and just growing of value, just beautiful oasis, your own Garden of Eden, per se. So I'll see you in the next video. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead.